5.2 Collect requirements. Collect requirements is a process of determining, documenting and managing stakeholder needs and requirements to meet objectives. The key benefit of this process is that it provides the basis for defining the product scope and the project scope. This process is performed once or at predetermined points in the project, and that's from the PMBOK Guide page 138. This is the second step in the PMI 6-step project scope management process. As we have seen in the module overview, project scope management includes the processes required to ensure the project includes all of the work required and only the work required to complete the project successfully, and that's from PMBOK Guide page 717. One of the main keys to success in this part of the process is the active involvement of the key stakeholders, especially the customer, because the outputs of the project must fulfill the customer's needs. The customer is simply the person or the group that will receive the final products, services or results. They may be a customer in the everyday meaning of the word, which is a person outside the organisation who is paying to have a product created for them, or they may be within the same organisation or even within the same department. But no matter how experienced or proficient the project manager and team is, they can't read minds. Only the customers know for sure what will satisfy them, and so it's these customer needs or requirements we're trying to determine at this stage. It's important to note that requirements are not the same as products, services or results. Suppose the customer says, I want a new website. We might build the best website in the world with all the cleverest features, but the customer may be unhappy with it. We need to understand the difference between the stated needs and the implied needs. Suppose the customer says, I want a new website. This is the customer's stated need, but the customer's implied need might be, I want to sell goods, or I want to facilitate free bicycle tours, or I want to run online training courses, I want to display all my new photographs, or I want to build a self-help forum. The list is endless, but as you can see, if we don't understand what the client is actually hoping to achieve, i.e. their implied needs, then the chances of satisfying them simply by meeting their stated needs are very unlikely. And once we've uncovered these hidden implied needs and expectations, we can start coming up with products, services and results that we can satisfy them with. Needs and expectations collectively are what we call requirements, and in order to ensure that we can meet these requirements, we must be decomposed into quantifiable components that can be measured and tested to confirm that the stakeholders' requirements have actually been fulfilled. This implies that the components must be objective, and so you must avoid adjectives which are better, faster, stronger, and replace them with a metric. For example, a requirement for service has to be more efficient or to solve more problems in less time. These are meaningless because you can't measure the change, and so it's impossible to objectively determine if the project was a success. An objective measurement may be average time for service desk to solve issues reduced by 4%. Average issues solved per week increased by 9% on the same week 1 year ago. These can be measured, and so you can tell if the requirements have been missed, met or exceeded. The inputs, tools and techniques and outputs for the collect requirements process are shown in figure 5.4. Collect requirements process inputs. Number 1, the project charter. The project charter is created very early in the project, and it's just quite a brief, probably 1 or 2 page high-level document, and it's used in this process to provide information on high-level project description and the high-level project requirements. Input number 2 is the project management plan, and please remember the project management plan is not a single document, it's not the schedule, it's a collection of 18 sub-plans, baselines and the life cycle. In particular, we're looking for 2 sub-plans created as outputs of the plan scope management process, namely the scope management plan and the requirements management plan. The scope management plan details how the collect requirements process will be managed, and the requirements management plan will detail how we should collect, analyse and document the requirements. And We will also use the project management plan to provide the stakeholder management plan, which holds details of stakeholder communication requirements and a level of stakeholder engagement, which will enable us to influence the stakeholders to provide detailed information that we require. Number 3 is the project documents. Typically these would be the assumption log. The assumption log is where assumptions about the project stakeholders are stored, and we don't have to prove assumptions are valid, but they are what you believe to be real and true for the length of the project. The assumption log will also hold the constraints. The constraints are what will limit your ability to manage the project. Lessons learned register. This contains lessons learned on previous projects and can be applied to this project. For example, what were the most effective techniques for collecting information? Was there something that had a bad outcome and we could avoid this? Stakeholder register. This is where you will find details of the actual stakeholders who you'll need to talk to, and you'll also find details of their expectations but at a high level, so this makes a good starting point. Input number 4 is the business case. This is another high-level document which contains information to use in this process. The PMBOK guide tells us on page 141 that the business case can describe requirements, desired and optional criteria for meeting the business needs. Input number 4 is called agreements. If you look in section 12.2.3.2 on page 489 of the PMBOK guide, the sort of agreements we're looking for are contracts and similar. And the reason we're interested in contracts, if they exist, is because they will include information about the major deliverables from the project. The last two inputs are common to most processes in the PMBOK guide: the enterprise environmental factors and the organizational process assets. So number 6 is enterprise environmental factors, and they would provide us with the organization's culture, its infrastructure, personnel administration and the marketplace conditions. Number 7, organizational process assets, should provide policies we have to obey, procedures we have to follow, historical information and lessons learned from previous projects so we can benefit from past experience and avoid past mistakes. As I said earlier in this video, all of the inputs will be at a high level because we're only just starting to work out the details. And so in the exam, if they ask a question about the inputs to this process, in the answers look for documents which are going to have a lot of detail, such as a scope statement, work breakdown structure, the activity list and so on, because you know they can't be the inputs to this process. And now we come to the tools and techniques. This is quite a long list. Number 1 is a very popular input, expert judgment. It is the input from individuals or groups with specialized knowledge or training in business analysis, so they will know how to drill down for business details. Requirements elicitation, so they can extract the implied needs from the customer as well as the stated needs. Requirements analysis, so they can make sense of what they uncover. Requirements documentation, so they can record the list of requirements. Project requirements in previous similar projects, so they can apply a reasonableness check to the requirements and perhaps even suggest missed requirements. Diagramming techniques, so they can present the information in a meaningful way. Facilitation, so they can assist stakeholders and the team to work together efficiently. And conflict management, so they can prevent the stakeholders fighting over requirements. On a medium to large scale project, it is extremely unlikely that you will find one individual with all of these skills, and so you're really looking for a group of people or a team to make sure that all your bases are covered. And a huge tip here, as you proceed through each of these processes and benefit from the lessons learned from previous projects, please make sure that the team records lessons learned from the project as they learn them. This is for the benefit of future projects. And another big tip is don't wait until the end of the project to record the lessons learned. Record them as you go, because at the end you'll have forgotten them, you will have misremembered them, the people with important lessons will have learned, or the back of an envelope you'd scribble it down onto, the dog will have eaten them. So just record them as you go. Number 2 is a bunch of data gathering tools and techniques. These include brainstorming, which is a way of extracting information from a group by using techniques to generate and filter ideas. For example, in several projects I've used de Bono's thinking hat system. But the important thing for the exam about brainstorming is not just thinking ideas in a group, it's coming up with lots and lots of ideas and then finding a way of reducing those ideas just down to a few really good ones. The next one is interviews. This is usually just one or more interviews talking directly with stakeholders individually and asking questions from a script, as well as extracting information. This technique is also useful for detecting and eliminating misinformation. And when used correctly, especially one-on-one, it helps reduce fear in the subject, especially when the information is confidential or potentially harmful. This way you can elicit information that would not be revealed in an open forum. The next data gathering tool is a focus group. Unlike an interview, a focus group is intended to get people talking together and interacting. And in this case, there should be a moderator or facilitator who just sets ground rules and keeps the conversation headed in the right direction instead of talking about the kids at school and the holidays and that sort of thing. This tool works best when all of the people in the group are familiar with the proposed product, service or result in its business need, along with subject matter experts. Questionnaires and surveys are of use when you need input from a large number of people or where they're physically far apart. It would be very inefficient to interview them or to bring them together in workshops. Sometimes the results from questionnaires and surveys can be further refined by interviews or small groups. The final data gathering is benchmarking. Whenever you see the word benchmarking, always think of comparing with something similar. In this case, you can compare the required products, service or results with other similar offerings in the marketplace or even within the same organisation to see if the requirements could be improved. The input number 3, data analysis, and in particular document analysis. This is used to analyse existing documents to find clues about the requirements. A list of possible documents to check is listed on page 143 of the PMBOK guide. By this stage, we should have a lot of data, some useful and some not. We need to sort it out, filter it through some way to come up with a definitive list. And that brings us to tool and technique number 4, decision making. The 3 techniques suggested for this are voting, autocratic decision making and multi-criteria decision analysis. I will cover voting last. Autocratic decision making means that one person makes the final decision. Multi-criteria decision analysis is an attempt to simplify the process where various criteria are listed and ranked in a matrix. Now back to voting. This is a common method for allowing a group to make decisions even if there is a level of disagreement within the group. And with there are 3 common techniques which I've actually covered previously, but I do see them in the exam pretty often. The first is unanimity, meaning being unanimous. This is where everyone in the group has to be in agreement or the motion isn't carried. Majority is simply where more than 50% of the members of the group agree, and it helps to have an uneven number of members so that you don't have a tie situation, or you can appoint a senior member to have a cast and vote where there is a 50-50 split. Plurality, this means that the option is selected if the largest group is in agreement, even if the largest group is less than 50%. This doesn't make sense if you have just 2 options unless voters are allowed to abstain. For an example of plurality is where you have 10 voters and 3 options. 4 vote for option 1, 3 for option 2 and 3 for option 3. Option 1 will be chosen simply because 4 is the largest group, but it is less than the majority, which would require 6 votes or more. Tools and techniques number 5, data representation. 2 suggested possibilities are affinity diagrams, which enable similar ideas to be clustered into groups, and mind mapping, which brings clarity to similarities and differences in proposed ideas. Number 6, interpersonal and team skills, and these would include nominal group technique, which is a structured form of brainstorming which enables suggestions to be ranked, and you can read all about that on pages 144 and 145 of the PMBOK guide. It's too long to cover here. It's easy to understand, but the only thing I don't understand about it is why it is included in interpersonal team skills instead of data gathering techniques, but that's what the PMBOK guide has chosen to do. The next interpersonal team skill is observation conversation. This is also known as job shadowing, basically because it is similar to spying on people as they do the work. It's a useful technique when people are either unwilling or unable to describe their duties. Again, it's easy to understand, and again, it's hard to see why this fits in with interpersonal skills. Next one is number 7, facilitation. Facilitation is used with focus sessions which bring key stakeholders together to define product requirements. Workshops can be used to quickly define cross-functional requirements and to reconcile stakeholder differences. Because of their interactive group nature, well-facilitated sessions can build trust, foster relationships and improve communication amongst the participants, which can lead to increased stakeholder consensus. In addition, issues can be discovered earlier and resolved more quickly than in individual sessions. And that's from the PMBOK guide, page 145. Also on page 145, you'll find 3 examples of facilitation. Joint application development, quality function deployment and user stories. These are well explained in the PMBOK guide, so I can't really add anything to them. However, they do appear reasonably often in the examination. The final tools and techniques of collect requirements is number 7, context diagrams. A context diagram is a diagrammatic representation of a high-level product scope within the business context. It shows how actors, which means people and other systems, interact with the product. And you'll find an example of a context diagram on page 146 of the PMBOK guide. That brings us to our final tool and technique, number 8, prototypes. A prototype was originally a small-scale working model of a final product and is obviously vastly cheaper to produce, and it enables a number of problems to be detected early in the project to enable the product to be redesigned. It's also a great opportunity for stakeholders to get a taste of the final product and might stimulate more ideas. Nowadays, a computer-generated 3D model can remove the need for building a model, or of course if you need a physical model, it can often be 3D printed. There's a hidden trap in prototypes which is related to the trueness of the model. Many years ago I was working on a project in Ireland for a textiles group. One company wove genuine Irish linen from flax which came from Russia. Another company wove synthetic fabrics, another was knitted fabrics, another performed offset printing of the fabrics, and the last one made synthetic leather jackets and boots. The company that made the jackets and boots produced synthetic leather, which is made from vinyl, and they also produced thin foam sheeting and woven nylon fabric. They sent the synthetic leather, the foam and the nylon fabric to an outside company which bonded the 3 together to form the synthetic leather, and then it was returned for the jackets and boots to be cut from and made up. The bonding process was very expensive, so the company initiated a project to find a cheaper way to do it. They mailed out requirements to a number of companies in Ireland with experience with gluing and bonding machinery. One of the companies made a prototype of a machine, just a little desktop machine for bonding the fabrics. This was demonstrated to the project team and everyone was very happy with the outcome. But unfortunately the owner of the group of companies got involved in the process, and instead of contracting the outside company to build a full-size bonding machine, the CEO bought the outside company. His logic was that his group could now make a fortune doing bonding work for all the other companies. When we study risk management later in the course, one of the risk treatment strategies we will cover is called transference. This means attempting to give the risk to someone else, usually by outsourcing or insurance. But the trap to transference is that the people you're transferring to must be external to your organisation, because the organisation still owns all the risk for its employees. If the group had contracted the outside company to build a full-size machine, then this would have transferred the risk to the outside company. But buying the outside company means it now has the company inside the group and the group owns the risk. I will omit the details of a long sad story, but the punchline is that although the prototype worked perfectly, the full-size machine was a total failure. Whenever they tried bonding, there was always bubbles in the fabric. The CEO kept pouring money into the company trying to get the machine working, but he paid so much money that the entire group went bankrupt. So make sure that your prototype is a true representation of the final product. We've now completed the inputs and tools and techniques for the collect requirements process, and so it just leaves the outputs. And as you can probably guess, the outputs are focused on the requirements you just collected. So output number 1 is requirements documentation. Requirements documentation describes how individual requirements meet the business need of the project. Requirements may start out at a higher level and become progressively more detailed as more information about the requirements is known. Before being baselined, requirements need to be unambiguous, measurable and testable, traceable, complete, consistent, and acceptable to key stakeholders. The format of the requirements documentation may range from a simple document listing all the requirements categorized by stakeholder and priority to more elaborate forms containing an executive summary, detailed descriptions and attachments. And the PMBOK guide is not prescriptive in any of this. It's up to you what you want. The final output is number 2. Traceability matrix, which I've mentioned before. It links requirements to the individual requester or requester group and shows the justification and current status. Please see figure 5.7 in the PMBOK guide. Examples of a traceability matrix are on page 149 of the PMBOK guide. So this brings us to the end of collect requirements. The next lesson is 5.3, define scope.